There's a proposition here in California where we vote on specific ballot measures. Not every state has this, but we have Prop 30 coming out. This is a 1.75% tax on incomes earned over $2 million for the next 20 years in California, which, by the way, had a $100 billion surplus that would go towards clean energy. This was proposed originally by environmental groups, but Newsom has come out to battle against this, which would seem counterintuitive because he's so pro-environment. What this would do is spend about 80% of this $100 billion in new tax revenue over the next 20 years. 80% would go towards charging stations for EVs and motivating customers to buy EVs. 20% would go to combat the crazy amount of wildfires we're having here. Gavin Newsom, that is, called this a cynical scheme devised by a single corporation, Lyft, to funnel state income tax revenue to their company. Lyft has provided almost all of the almost $48 million in funding for this Prop 30. And the reason is because California is going to require 90% of ride-sharing miles to be traveled by zero-emission vehicles in 2030. You know, on top of that California is going to not let you sell anything other than EVs in 2035 if this continues. Now you've got a bunch of people on the other side of this doing anti-Prop 30, including the California Teachers Association, because they want the money. Reed Hastings over at Netflix, Moritz over at Sequoia, Sam Altman over at OpenAI. Well, what do you think of this, Freeberg? I'm curious.
Sorry, what side are they on, Jacob? The side
Moritz,
of Lyft?
Altman, no, they're saying don't do this because they are trying to control taxes in California.
They're on Newsom's side.
Newsom's side, hey, this is a grift by Lyft because Lyft is concerned that they're going to have to, bear the brunt of 90% of miles. So I guess I don't know if it's original sin, but the one of the levers here is Lyft has got the majority of their rides are in California. Uber has stayed out of this because they don't have as much exposure because the number of rides in California is a smaller percentage of their overall revenue. Brad, you have some thoughts too here, I think. So Freeberg or Brad?
I'm just looking at the board of directors at Lyft and thinking to myself, good God, what are these people thinking? Spending $40 to $50 million on this, it just seems that they've totally lost the script. The company has way bigger problems to focus on, right, than, this measure. Have a little faith in the system that if we don't get to a place where this is reasonably practical over the next 10 years, then I'm sure we will evolve, right, the legislation around this. Kudos to Dara and the team at Uber for not running scared on this, right, for not trying to push this through. These corporate governance initiatives guised as referendums in this state. I mean, this is just bad politics, bad policy. I mean, we got Valerie Jarrett on the board of this company. You got political sophistication on the board of this company. I want to be, I wish I was a fly on the wall. I want to know the conversation that went down and who raised their hand and said, this is the highest and best use of $40 million of our money.
Crazy. Yeah,
right?
Makes no sense. Freeberg, you have thoughts on you've talked before about how you think the free market should solve these things.
What is the governance structure at Lyft, guys?
I knew that was coming. I knew it was coming.
Did they have super voting shares? Yeah.
Anybody look?
I don't know the answer to that.
So I think that the tax rate in California is high enough now that we all have friends in our poker group who have left for the state of Texas or the state of Florida, where there are lower tax rates and where they feel like they're getting more value for their tax dollars. There's certainly a calculus going on with Newsom. I believe in the impact that having higher tax rates would have on what is clearly not just a theoretical, but an actual evidenced, exodus from the state of wealthy and high income earners. This could be like, at some point there's a tipping point that looks a lot like France, where you raise the rates high enough wealthy people leave, and the net tax dollars actually go down, like what happened in France when they introduced their wealth tax. Then they reversed it and everyone came back. I will say, more important long-term point, I don't see a world where we don't have over 60% tax rates on the wealthiest people in this country at a federal level. If you look at, if you assume a 5% long-range, call it 15, 20-year horizon for interest rates, even 4%, on $30 trillion of outstanding debt, and you assume that the voter base will never vote to reduce Social Security or Medicare entitlement programs, And obviously the defense budget won't get cut. We are not going to see a situation in this country on a federal basis where we can actually meet all of our fiscal obligations without incremental tax revenue. And I think it is much more likely that, look, whatever happens with the state initiative happens. But I think it's very likely that over time, the only way for the United States to bridge its fiscal gap is going to be to raise income, to increase the tax rates. I don't see another solution because I don't think that the federal government or in our kind of democratically elected Congress, we're going to see a system that's going to say, hey, let's go for austerity measures. Let's reduce entitlement programs. Both sides will say that. It's just not going to happen. So tax rates, higher tax rates, I think are coming. Well, maybe California will skip over this particular generation, but I don't see how the United States continues to thrive over the next 15 to 20 years without tax rates that will today seem exorbitant.
Well, in the last 20 years, we blew through a debt to GDP that was, I think, 57%, and it basically doubled. And so, David, to your point, when we wanted to feel prosperous, what we did was we financed it. Right. We went out and we, put out a ton of debt in order to make sure that our entitlement spending or our defense spending or whatever the things were that we needed as a population to feel like we were growing and moving forward as a society we had. So that is the practical nature of what happens. And look, a lot of people think that there is some upper bound to debt to GDP. And I'm actually of the opposite view, which is I think that, the quote unquote invisible hand justifies us moving debt to GDP to higher and higher rates. So the first time the United States went past 100%, we thought it was the end of the world. It turned out it wasn't. We'll eventually go past 200. Somebody will clamor and, be anxiety riddled, but they'll take some SSRIs. They'll be okay. We'll keep moving forward. Then we'll get to 300%. We'll keep moving forward. So we are in a debt spiral that is a feature, not a bug, of how democratic societies work. As a companion to that, I do agree with you that taxation kind of is a pendulum. It ebbs and flows. And, we're in the part where it's going to go higher before it goes lower. But I want to tell you a story, which is that in the beginning of this fall, I was in the Middle East and then I was in Asia, and they have very different taxation schemes, right? And many of them have zero corporate gains tax and, sometimes zero income tax. But then the opportunities for them to be able to invest and drive returns is also commensurately lower, meaning there's not as much alpha in most of the opportunities that they see. Whereas if you go to California, you have to pay 60% tax, but then, you could be an angel investor in Uber, and all of a sudden take 25,000 and turn it into 100 million, which is ungodly. It's incredible. So I think that, in my opinion, actually, there's actually this beautiful symmetry where even if taxes are high, your earnings potential is commensurately higher, such that the net that you're left with is the same as if you were in another place where taxes may be zero, but you're just not going to get exposed to the same ways to make money. And I think obviously there's corner cases where that's not true, but I don't think sweating taxes is a really important waste. It's an important way to spend somebody's time. I just think it doesn't matter.
Brad, final word?
I would just say the beautiful thing about federalism is we get to A/B test in real time different points of view. And so we're seeing the biggest A/B test maybe in the history of federalism between the state of California, the state of Texas, and the state of Florida. And it's not just tax rates, right? When Elon leaves to go to Texas, we have the head of the California General Assembly, right, changing her Twitter profile to say good riddance and flipping the bird to Elon, right? There is a hostility toward business that has emerged in California that I think is commensurate and related to the tax rate, but also separate. At the same time, we have the mayor of Miami texting us, asking us to come down for a visit. We have friends in Texas who are literally politicians who are marketing their state to people in California. And we're going to be able to, political scientists will look back in 5 or 10 years and they'll be able to answer those questions, Friedberg. Yeah. But I suspect that makes us a much stronger place for experimentation than countries like France, where it's all or none.
Yeah, and just to give people an idea, to Chamat's point about debt to GDP, here's the chart. Early part of our lifetimes, 50%. 1990s, 60, 70%. After the Great Recession, the pandemic, 120%. Japan's at 200%, I think. So there's obviously
it doesn't mean anything. I know
the
that
interest
people
payments might
want
at some point. Yeah,
I really don't think so, because I think what will happen is you'll just move the yield. The yield to maturity will move out, and we'll issue again. This is the funny thing. We talked about this last night at poker. Like, Trump's ideas, some of them were actually very brilliant. They were just packaged through this lens of being a total goofball, so you couldn't take it seriously. But 100-year bonds, when rates were zero, now looks like, my God, what a brilliant move. And
well, I mean, if you could take a 50-year worldview about climate, about nuclear energy, about semis, we didn't get to semiconductors again this week. We got so much good stuff, but we do need to take very long, multi-decade looks at investment. And so why not make a 25 or 50-year bond for semiconductors?